is economics? This is the question that we normally start out with when we are beginning our study of economics. Economics is a social science. It's about people. Now, it's true that oftentimes when we're studying economic problems, we're interested in tools and machines and factories and things like that. We're interested in things, but we're only interested in them to the extent that they're connected or related to people. Now, what we're interested in when we study economics is how people use resources. We know that resources are scarce. This basic fact of scarcity is what begins our study of economics. Resources are limited, and any resource can be used for many, many things, and so these ends are competing. This is what scarcity means. So, with a particular piece of land, we can have a farm, or we can use it for housing, or to drill oil for a highway or a park or a school. All those would be great uses for a particular piece of land, but we can only use it for one of those things. And so there's many possible uses, but these ends are competing, and so we have to figure out what's the best use for each of these resources. Now, scarcity, the fact that resources are limited, forces people to make choices. And so people when they make a choice, they make a trade-off between one thing or another. So a certain set of resources can be used to go on vacation to a great place like Paris, or it can be used to buy a nice new car. But the resources can't be used for both. If you buy the car, you can't go to Paris. If you go to Paris, you can't buy the car. And so scarcity, because we have scarcity, we have to make choices, and the choices involve trade-offs. Now, when we're looking at costs in economics look at cost slightly differently. They define cost as the opportunity cost. It's connected directly to the choices and to the trade-offs. So when you make a choice, the cost of the choice is the thing that you did not choose. So the thing you didn't choose is the cost of the thing that you did choose. So to use an example here, on Saturday night, we can either go to the library or we can go out and socialize. If we go to the library, then the cost of going to the library is the fact that we couldn't go socializing. If we go socializing, then the cost of doing that is the fact that we can't go to the library. But note that it's only the most highly valued thing that we didn't do that represents the cost. It's not all the possible things we didn't do. Because when we're choosing, we're really choosing between the most two highly valued things, and the highest valued thing is the one we choose, and the next most highly valued thing is the cost of that choice. So, the choices that we make these choices in the context of incentives, and incentives can be positive in the form of rewards or negative in the form of penalties. And so our choices really depend very heavily on the incentives that we make. They're the context for our choices. And the economic unit that we're interested in is the individual, because only individuals can make choices, and only individuals can make the valuations that choices are based on. So these valuations are subjective in nature. They're specific to the individual. When we're making choices, the information that an individual has is always limited. It's imperfect. But we know that when people choose, when they take actions, they're doing so because they're being purposeful. They have an end in mind, and the choice they're making is a means to that end. So they have this purpose in mind. They're purposeful. And lastly, their choices are rational. Now be careful. Rational does not mean their choices are good or smart or wise or even correct. It just means that the humans, when they're going about their choices, are using a logical process to try to pick the best means to achieve particular ends. And so we know that the value is determined by utility. So when we're making a choice, we're trying to maximize our utility. We're making valuations of the different possible choices. And we're doing so in a way that will hopefully maximize our utility. Utility refers to the usefulness of a choice, the usefulness of a resource or a good or a service involved in a choice. And this concept of utility is specific to an individual. It's personal. It's based on subjective values, and it's based, ultimately on our preferences. Now, the most basic tool we have in economics is the comparison of costs and benefits. But we don't just compare any cost and benefits. In economics, when we're looking at choices, individuals weigh the marginal cost and the marginal benefits. These are the incremental costs and the incremental benefits that are associated with the choice that we're making. And so the sunk cost or past benefits don't matter. We're at a particular point in time. Right now, we're evaluating a choice, and it's only the incremental cost and benefits that are associated with that choice, the forward-looking marginal cost and marginal benefits that matter when we're making that choice. Those are the ones that are the direct result of the decision we're making, and therefore those are the costs and benefits that we weigh when we're making a decision. We have this feature about the benefits the costs, if you will. As we make trade-offs, our opportunity costs, our marginal costs increase. We have to give up more of one good to get more of another. So we have this feature of marginal costs. The more we consume of something, the more resources we allocate or choose, then the greater is the marginal cost of each incremental unit. So marginal costs increase. Now conversely, marginal benefits work the opposite way. The more we consume of a particular good, the more we have of any resource, well, the smaller is the incremental benefit or marginal benefit from each incremental unit, and therefore the less we're willing to pay for additional units of that. We call this decreasing marginal benefit. So marginal costs increase, marginal benefits decrease, and individuals choose the point where the marginal costs and the marginal benefits are equal, where the marginal cost and the marginal benefits are balanced, and this is based on their preferences, their utility, and the subjective valuations that they make. So individuals choose where the marginal cost and marginal benefits are equal. And ultimately, these individual choices are connected to producers and sellers through the market process. So we have to also note that economists distinguish between two types of statements, positive statements and normative statements. A positive statement is a what is statement. The cost of health insurance is $8,211 per family. That's a positive statement. So what is statement? And what is statements can be tested. They can be checked as facts. You can go out in the real world and observe and say, is this true or it's not true? And this is different than a normative statement. A normative statement is a what should be statement. Everyone should have health insurance. That's a normative statement. It expresses an opinion, but the problem is that normative statements can't be tested. We can't go out and observe and say if they're true or false. So they're not particularly helpful to us in the scientific process. So as economists, we focus on positive statements. What is statements? Because we can test them. We can go out in the real world and see if they're actually true. Now, the economic question that arises, the one that we want to study, is how do the individual choices that people make determine how scarce resources are used to produce the various goods and services? Well, there's three important questions that have to be answered. The first is what products, what goods and services do we make? What are the goods and services that people want? What goods and services that people value? And ultimately, that choice, what gets made, is made by consumers through the market process. We have this notion of consumer sovereignty, where in the end, what the consumers want is what producers and suppliers will build, and so consumers are the ones who choose what gets produced. Now, when it comes to how goods and services are produced, well, in that case, we have entrepreneurs, and working with the other factors of production, land, labor, and capital, they organize these factors of production into production processes, and those ultimately the entrepreneurs, whether they're working by themselves or in a firm, they're the ones that determine how goods and services are produced. And then lastly, for whom? Who gets the goods and services once they are produced? Well, in a market system, distribution is a byproduct of the production process. So Landowners earn rent, laborers earn wages, capital providers earn interest, and entrepreneurs earn profit. The distribution, who gets what, is a byproduct of the production process. Now, our goal in economics is to unscramble cause and effect. It's to discover positive statements that are consistent with the world that we observe. We put statements that we can test and see if they're true. And if we do this well, then we can better understand how the world works. But we have to be careful because the relationships in economics involve complex phenomena. Remember, it's more like psychology than it is like chemistry or physics. In natural sciences, we can reduce things to one variable and one unknown, but we can't do that in here. We're always at the end left with many variables and many unknowns. So we build economic models. These models are based on abstractions. And then we have to test them in the real world. Sometimes testing economic models is not easy, but we do our best. And in that process, if we do it well, then we will increase our understanding or improve our understanding of how our economic world works. We have to remember that the goal of our science is to see the problem as a whole and not make the mistake of only looking at certain pieces. This is the lesson from, and the quote from Henry Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson. We have to look at problems as a whole and make sure that we don't make the mistake of just looking at them in pieces or just focusing on certain pieces and ignoring other ones. And this, when we do this, we are thinking like an economist. And that's our goal, to remember that economics is about people. People live in a world with scarce resources, which forces them to make choices. And our goal is to try to study those individual choices that people make. And if we do that well, then we will take our first step towards thinking like an economist.